Hey everybody, welcome once again to the Rise of the GM. We're here today to talk about a series of abductions that needed investigating. We're going to talk about a sadistic lordling and books that inspire these two GMs here on Rise of the GM. Well, hey there, Adam. It is good to be back here again on Rise of the GM. We had a really great episode last week with a co-host, Eric Bright. If you have not checked out that podcast or that live stream, go back and check that out because it was a really good one. And today we're going to talk about a lot of great things, including some things that have inspired us in our GM efforts. But before we get to any of that, we had a question. We had it last week and we were going to mention this and we forgot. I'd like you to read that question, then we're gonna respond to it right at the outset here.
Yeah. So this is from Wataya Hotel 98. Dear Matthew and Adam, I have a meta podcast question for this week. What are the sound effects that play at the beginning of each show before the opening music? At first, I thought it was someone brushing their teeth, followed by a pouring cup of coffee. Then I got to thinking it sounded like someone sawing wood and pouring coffee. Now, however, the mischievous player brain in me thinks it sounds like someone hyperventilating and then answering nature's call, i.e. peeing. Your adoring public needs answers. Sincerely, Wataya Hotel 98. But then there was a follow-up email that came, it looks like about 6 hours later. So Wataya did this. Follow-up email. Disregard my previous question. I was mixed up since I listen rather than watch. But I happened to watch your YouTube stream out of curiosity and answered my own question. LOL. So what do you have to say about that, Matthew?
So, yeah, in case, I'll just, for those of you watching, it is this. I'm just going to play a little bit here. Okay, so you can see what's going on there. The words kind of get scratched on, and then like our little die coffee cup gets filled up. And so we got this as an animation from, who was it, Adam?
Sam Roten made that for us. We had the logo made already, and he did some work on that and was like, hey, just for fun, because I love you guys and want to do this. Like, he made that animation. It was really cool. That
animation. And so I got that animation. It was quiet. It had like kind of the, look like it kind of gets scratched on there, and then, the filling up of the cup. And I'm like, man, that needs some sound. Plus we're going to put the music and then like change the colors of that logo a bunch. You guys, if you've been watching on YouTube, you see that. But like, so I went and found and recorded a little bit, and the scratching is actually the sound of, like when you get those little things that you scratch off, like that have like a gift on the back of a gift. I guess it's like a lottery, a scratch off lottery ticket. I've never done a scratch off lottery ticket, but that kind of sound. And that's actually the scratching sound that's there, just recorded. And then it looks like a cup of coffee. So I was going to be filling a cup of coffee, but it was actually pouring a pitcher of water into a glass. Problem is that sound was too long, so I like sped it up so it's a little higher pitched. It's like really fast, but that is the sound, and I just show you that again. So we got the scratching of the ticket here and the filling of the. It's nice, right?
Yeah, love that.
But my favorite is when he said it sounded like hyperventilating and then relieving yourself. So let's all listen to that one more time. And I want you to think someone hyperventilating, breathing, and then peeing real fast. Let's listen one more time. Think of that. All right. Well, I don't know about the hyperventilating because I can't not hear the scratching, but I love it. It was a fast pee if it was a pee. But anyway, if you're all on podcast, you may have wondered that same thing. So we did want to bring that up and remind you that we do have a live stream that goes on YouTube, Rise of the GM. Just search that, you'll find it. But that has the actual visual on there so you can see what's happening. But good question there, Sam. And so glad you had so many creative answers.
Yeah.
As you thought of that.
I was like laughing harder and harder through the three different thoughts. And we may need to toss one of those up, maybe have an Instagram poll of, all right, what do you think? Just like, what's your imagination? Let's get creative. What do you think
When you
this could
hear
be?
this, of course, most people now
So,
probably will have heard
yeah.
this and they will have
What did
seen
you
it.
think?
So.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love
All
it.
right. So as usual, we do a little scene starter every week, and we talk about like what we could or would or might use from that. We have our main topic, and then we have an NPC. So we're going to start with the Eureka topic. Adam's going to read this. It's our encounter starter for the day, entitled "Gone."
Gone. Yeah, this is an abduction encounter. So, gone. The PCs have returned to their homeland after an extended time away. When they arrive, they notice that one of the outlying farms has been abandoned. Farming implements are scattered on the ground, doors have been left open, and the furniture is overturned. Entering town, they find other abandoned houses in similar state of disarray. As they get closer to the center of town, they find signs of a struggle, blood on the ground, overturned carts. When they
Before you
reach,
go on,
yeah,
I'm gonna like say I love like those kinds of beginnings where there's a mystery in the beginning. They come and they find this like abandoned farmhouse
right.
out on the fringe, and then they get in and they find nobody, and then they find this stuff, and
Yeah,
that's always cool.
yeah.
Cool way to start.
Peeling back the onion there. So,
Yeah.
um, when they reach the town hall, they see that it's been destroyed. Inside, the PCs find a note written by a citizen telling how creatures wearing the sign of a white fist have come and taken people away each night for the past 6 nights. The White Fist is a group of slavers led by a powerful ogre. Shortly after the PCs finish the note, the White Fist slaver party comes to town to round up anyone they might have missed. A fight ensues. The PCs can then track the slavers back to an abandoned outpost near a river where the larger White Fist party is encamped. There they will discover that the last of the townspeople have been taken downriver by boat. The boat has become stuck downriver, giving the PCs a chance to catch up. They fight the slaver crew and free a small number of townspeople. Stashed aboard the boat is a map that indicates a large camp by the river's end. The PCs can arrive at the slavers' fortress where hundreds of people are imprisoned, awaiting transport across the sea. The PCs must then liberate the camp. While it's helpful if the PCs have a connection to the town, it's not necessary. The town needs to be a remote location, as slavers never strike in an area where a large organized army could repel them. This also prevents the townspeople or the PCs from going for help, as help wouldn't reach them in time. So this is the Eureka encounter gone.
Yeah. And so just like last week when we were talking with Eric, I think this one, if you're not careful, if you're a new GM and you're reading this, it would be very easy to like, okay, you guys are going to be railroaded. First you do this, then you do this, then you do this, and okay. So first you find this, and then you encounter the band that comes in. You fight them. Once you beat them, you're going to, be able to find the ones down the river in the stuck boat. Then you're going to go and find the encampment. Then and it's going to feel almost like you're running them through a gauntlet. And so again, you've got to let them make choices. So this is like a layout of what could happen in your mind. I did that on my mind there. See that with my forehead right there. And it gives you like what kinds of things could they encounter if they went this way. So you give them the freedom, and they may, when the group comes in, they may fight them and then not know what to do and end up going a different direction, and you may have to modify, or they may get down, stream and find this stuff going on, and a whole different outcome may appear. You have to be ready for it to be different than this. Okay. You can't just say, I'm going to run you through all of these things, regardless if you want to or not. They may get to that little town. What's the beginning of that? It's like, let's see.
Their homeland.
It's in their homeland, but it's not their hometown, because probably they might be from a bigger city, and this is supposed to be kind of away and, a little more remote.
And like a farmhouse that's kind of abandoned, and then they're starting to see more abandoned houses as they come in.
And so you may get into this place and they may be like, well, we don't really care about this town. We're going to go on to the so-and-so. And then you're going to be like, okay, dang, I thought they were going to. But then, you can bring in this group that was looking for slaves. But what if they're like, hey, yeah, we don't care. Just don't come any closer to our homeland or whatever. We're going to leave. If they do that, you need to know, okay, how would I respond to that? And I do like, I think most adventuring parties are going to be looking for hooks, and they love fights. So I don't anticipate you having a problem getting them to fight this group of the White Hand coming, White Fist coming in. But it can happen. You just need to be prepared for that, and don't push them too hard to make them go the way you want them to go. But
For sure.
definitely, following this idea, there's some cool interactions and some fights and stuff that can happen. It's not real detailed as far as what do these interactions look like? What does the talking look like? Are there any friendly people? They leave all that to your imagination. This is just giving you an idea starter. And so with
Right.
this, I would sit down and begin to write, okay, when I found them at the boat, what if they met a person they knew on the boat or saw a person they
Right.
knew? Or what if, the boat was already in the middle of the river and it was stuck and they had to figure out not only how to, defeat these guys, but how to even get to the boat? What if, and,
Yeah. Yeah.
I would
The
begin
what
to do
ifs.
some of that. But
Yeah.
yeah, what are your thoughts on this, Adam?
Mhm. Yeah. I think I liked your point, the point of like, be prepared for other things to change. Like I was thinking about, okay, what if like I kind of like gave emphasis to a fight ensues when I was reading that. And that's the assumption. I feel like 99% of the time that's probably going to happen just because people are itching for a fight, like like
PCs
ready to
love
roll
to
some
fight.
dice, and it's like, and I have noticed too, like it's probably for good reason, good reason here, but like you throw anytime I feel like slavers get thrown in the mix, it's like, all right, we're throwing down now, kind of
Nobody
thing. Like
likes slavers.
there's a justice issue here, and like even within these games, we're going to deal with this. So I feel like that's an easy hook that over and over I've been able to see people like engage with, and things. I wondered though, like one of those options, is okay, we kind of see what's going on here. Maybe we're a little more intelligent of a party, not so much a uh, brute force kind of party. Yeah, sure, you can take us, yeah, and they just like let themselves be taken. That's another situation. If that gets to be a little more intrigue as far as, okay, like we're being taken so that we can do something from the inside out. So even, preparing
Then
for,
then the fun becomes, do you let them take all of your armor and weapons?
right. Yeah. Yeah.
Because they're not going to allow slaves to just
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
all of their
Yeah. You
weapons
can
and
keep your
armor.
sword.
So
Why? Yeah, for sure. Cause I mean, that sets up a different kind of game, and that's a lot of fun. I mean, think back at, which I gave you a little bit of loopholes, but so Jade Mask's game, we're always talking about these games that we're running, and there was a time where the party got sent into prison, and they were supposed to be. You also were supposed to be like undercover, basically trying to figure out what was going on within that prison. You kind of were going to get your freedom, but I think I'm trying to remember. I think I took the armor. Some of you don't even deal with armor, so it wasn't a big deal. But it was like you basically had the equivalent of like a shiv, but you
yeah,
didn't get to keep your like swords and stuff. And but I wonder, like, I think that would be a really fun game in that aspect of this, to like as a player, okay, we're gonna actually be taken, we're gonna go over and undercover in this, and we're gonna like cause a rebellion from the inside out rather than just come in swinging, so I could see that happening. I think that'd be a lot of fun. This game, or this encounter, I think on the other kind of side of things, I think it would fit really well for like if you wanted to do a one shot, you're like, I'm kind of wanting to get my feet wet in GMing. Maybe you haven't done that before. This I think could be a really good stepping stone into that, because it has that very like outlined thing. And I think
hmm
when we're walking into a one shot particularly, or like, hey, we're doing this adventure, there's a little more grace for like the railroad. It's not such a big deal because it's like, hey, like the point is to sit down and play this adventure and to not get super sidetracked. So let's like, some of that like disbelief or whatever, you can just be like, oh, it's fine,
hmm
we're gonna move that direction. But this made me think a lot of actually red markets, and I know this is like kind of set for a fantasy, the ogre and everything, but I think it's because we've dealt with in that game people who kidnap other people. But this feels like a very like good red market scenario to me. If I'm thinking about like running some of those games
Red markets,
where,
again, for those of you
mm,
listening, it's this idea that the world has been overrun by zombies. They've
right,
made a stand at the Mississippi River, but anything to the west is lost. And there's like not just zombies out there you got to watch out for, but there's also the people who are also living out there. That just like if you think about any of your zombie movies,
yeah,
your greatest enemies sometimes are the other people. And
yeah,
so,
right, yeah, yeah. So I think this would fit really well even into some other genres of games too.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I like that. Okay, so again, hopefully that's something that can spark some thoughts in you. And if you're a beginning game master and you're like, okay, I want to run something, I don't even know what, maybe that's an outline. Like Adam said, you can follow, and you can maybe even follow a little more closely.
Mhm.
Chances are your people are going to take up the fight, so just be
Yeah.
ready for that. Chances are they're going to be like, somebody came into town who looks like a slaver, I attack,
Yeah,
roll
yeah, yeah.
dice, and they start going. But
I will say, if I jump back into that for a second, some hooks. If you're like, man, I don't want them to walk away, because I
yeah,
again, going back to Jade Mask's game, the party had an encounter with, there was a Aarakocra village that this hag was sending harpies against, and was like demanding that she could have their eggs, and they were saying no, so they were being attacked constantly, and you all had like went to deal with her, and that kind of went sideways in some ways, but you came back, you went on your trip, you went on the way back through, the harpy village was basically in this place of just abandoned.
the Aarakocra
Or
village.
sorry, Aarakocra. Yeah, Aarakocra village is like abandoned. There's some people that you found that were dead and kind of buried in their fashion, but that was one where you all. I realized part of it was my problem as a GM, but it's like you all kind of had a task, like you were trying to get this person to another place, and there was pretty much a decision at that point of like, we can't really deal with this currently. We need to, we'll come back maybe one day and deal with this, but we need to keep moving. And
And
I
then the
had,
consequences when we came back,
yeah,
everybody's dead.
yeah, right. So that like was a thing. And for me as a GM, it was like, well, man, I really thought this second time through, they maybe would go uh, engage with this hag again, but that's not the choice that was made. And it was like, okay, that's fine. Let's keep moving. But
Or
some,
same campaign.
mm,
We had this choice to do one of three tasks: go find a
right.
basilisk, go fight. I forget what they were, dragon something,
And
and we chose none of them. We're like,
right.
no, we're not going to do that. And he's like, okay. My plan for
Okay.
tonight was I had all three of
Those
those
three
legs
things.
planned out, and you guys
Yeah.
decided to just not do any of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
So those things all went in the file, and
so
that's,
it
I think,
does,
important. Yeah.
like you were getting ready to say, it does pay to have a hook. And so
Right.
maybe, coming back into your homeland, there can be people that you knew from your past, especially if they've given you rough ideas of characters from their past. You can say you go into town and, you find the half leg of your friend. You say
Oh
you have
man.
a friend who had a
Yeah.
prosthetic leg, not half leg, like in,
Oh.
yeah. So say they had a friend who had a prosthetic leg, and it's like you
Okay.
find this prosthetic leg
Yeah.
and you recognize it as so and so's. Okay, so your friend has been taken,
Right.
obviously without
Yeah.
half his leg. I don't know where that half leg idea came from just now, but
I love it. It's
but
part of the
anyway,
red
yeah,
markets
putting
thing.
putting some hooks in there, and then also this gives not just fighting, but they have to do some tracking. They have to come up with the idea, but then they have to track down the river where they have hopefully they would kill this party in town. Kill, they would take care of this party in town, and then they would still have to figure out how to find where everybody went. So there has to probably be some tracking
Right.
involved, and some swimming maybe, and some jumping, and who knows what all kinds of skills. But there can be some fun like that.
Yeah, I do think you hit that really well. Of if there's like either backstory NPCs that are involved in this, or maybe it's a place that they've spent some time in and have like relationships with NPCs, and it's like you come back, it's like, we gotta help these people. It not that they wouldn't just say we gotta help these people, but it does add a little bit more depth to that. I think too, this doesn't have that in there. It has the note, but I think there's an upping of the ante, even of if you have a survivor who is still there, that
Mhm.
can be like, you know, throw a kid that's still there, like maybe that's getting a little grimdark there, but like the kid's still there and they're like, my family, and I can't see a lot of people who are just going to like walk away from that.
Or an
In that
older
too.
man who like,
Yeah.
you're like, hey, you got to get out of here. Nobody's here. He's like, I'm not leaving. This is my home. And then the
Right.
slaver
Yeah.
gang comes in and they're looking for more people. And you're like,
Uh,
you're going to be found here in a second. They're
yeah.
coming.
That's
He's
true.
like, I'm fighting for my town. And then you're like,
Mhm.
well, dang it. Now we got to fight for your
Yeah.
town.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, those feel a little bit less like it's not so much strong arming people in, but it's using a hook to draw people into it, in my opinion. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, let's move from that into our main topic of the day. And the main topic of today is we're going to be talking about books that have inspired us or places that we get ideas from. And I suppose it doesn't have to just be books. It could be movies or something like that as well. But this is a pretty big topic, and it was interesting as I began thinking about this last week. Because we talk about this all the time, kind of here and there, little pieces. But when I sat down to think about, okay, what kinds of books have inspired me?
Right.
My goodness, so many.
Yeah.
And basically, I think it's like as when you're a GM, every book you read,
Mhm.
you should be thinking, oh, how could part of this be in the game? I know that I have said before, I probably am not your most creative writer. Maybe I like to think I'm a writer, but the truth is I'm less of a creative writer, and I'm a great chop and assemble guy. Those people who bring cars in and they like chop them and I don't know. I just know this from movies. You can tell it sounds like I don't know. It's like take that car to the chop shop and get the, pieces and parts.
Right.
But anyway, that's what I do with books. Every book I read, it's like pulling into Matthew's mind chop shop right there. And, you pull that book in and I'm like, ooh, I love this part. Shunk, I'm going to put that in a game. Oh, this character's great. Shunk, I'm going to put him in a game. And I just love the way this little piece of magic works. You're going to see that in a game. Oh, they're going to come across a character who has this ability from this book. You're going to see that in a game. And basically I do that every time I'm reading anything. It's like the things that intrigue me get jotted down, or the things that intrigue me get remembered as I'm putting a game together. And something can look very familiar if someone would have read that book. So in saying that, sometimes I start with like ideas I get from books. And I'm afraid to tell my players about those books because I don't want them to know
Right.
what's coming. And then it inevitably goes awry. And even if they read the book, they would have no idea what's going on. So I read a book by C.H. Cherry called the original was called The Tree of Swords and Jewels, but I think they called it The Dreaming Tree is the name of the book because it incorporates two. Anyway, it says this Irish fantasy kind of thing, and it just has such a different feel to it. And from that book, there was this elven character named Arafel that was more than mortal, but maybe not quite a god. As you read it, it's a little tough to find out. But like, it was such an intriguing like character and story that became the beginning of one of my campaigns, the Dormant Mind, the one we're in now. And at first I was like, man, I really want to get this book for several of the people in our game. Just give it to them. It's a thin book. It's easy to read. And it's just such a unique kind of idea. Yeah. But I like waited because I'm like, I got to wait till I play out some of this, because the truth is I used the name Arafel, which is in the book. And I used a character that's similar, but not the same. And I gave it some of the same quality as far as, the mystery of where she is and who she is. But then I changed everything, and the whole plot is completely different, and everything, you could read that book and have absolutely no idea what in the world's going to happen. And so now it's one of those things I should give that book to some people. But those kinds of things, I let my inspirations come from books. And to name a few is hard, but what I can tell you is, and this is probably where I'm going to be different than Adam, maybe not so different as I think. But my inspirations generally fall outside of Tolkien. So I know Adam not only read the books many times, watches the movies over and over again many times. I read those books once as a child, and I've kind of gone back a little bit to them,
Mm-hmm.
especially with my children, like starting to read them.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that basically they kind of set the genre for fantasy. After those books, it seemed like everybody was writing about, this it's this party going through and having to do something, and there's a very noble cause, and there's they kind of set a template for
Right.
a lot of writing, and you got to the place where you would see lots of books and you'd be like, okay, that's very Tolkien right there. You can recognize that right away. And so they have been bound to influence me in
Mm-hmm.
ways that I may not even quite understand. But typically, when I'm finding my inspiration from books, it's like books that are almost very completely different
Mm-hmm.
than the traditional elf, dwarf, human warrior. Although that's
Right.
what
Right.
ends up being in our party, right? But like the books that I read that inspire what I put in my games very rarely have that combination. I think you could get to the R.A. Salvatore stuff where you're talking about the Drizzt Do'Urden and the Icewind Dale.
Mm-hmm.
Was that trilogy or 5? I can't remember.
Trilogy. Yeah.
Trilogy. The Icewind Dale was kind of that same thing. They have the old D&D, the Tracy Hickman, Margaret Weiss. I think were the names.
Dragon.
Dragonlance.
Dragonlance. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Dragonlance stuff. It was that same thing where you have the human, you have the kinder, you have the halfling, you have the sorcerer, you have the barbarian. You get those like really broad kind of stereotypical roles in those two series. And of course, in the Drizzt Do'Urden series, the Icewind Dale, they kind of really give a character to this what would normally be the evil, the dark elf, who has this like great honor. And that's where like so much of that book was like inspiring for people.
Right.
And so, you can read those, but whether the Dragonlance series where you got the red wizard, Raceland and I can barely remember these names. It's been Cameron was his brother.
I read like one of those books. I'm
I read
afraid to
all
say.
those books. I got them when
Yeah.
I was like a freshman in college. We had a White Elephant gift exchange, and one of them was a 7-set series of Dragonlance novels,
Wow.
all bound up with a belt around them, given by like the guy who was the dorm liaison. So it wasn't even one of the students, and nobody was trying to get that but me. I'm like, oh, that's what I want. I'm going to steal this. And I'm like sitting there trying to act like, don't anybody take it. And nobody's even looking at it. They're
Yeah.
like, I want that
Nobody wants
Texas
that.
Instruments calculator. And I want the, whatever. I'm sitting there coveting my little Dragonlance
Right.
series of books. But yeah, I have a whole lot more listed here, but I'm going to give you a chance to speak into some of this stuff I've thrown on you, like Tolkien and Dragonlance. And
Right.
I know you have read the Icewind Dale and the Salvatore stuff. Talk a little bit about some of this yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned it may have been in your background episode too. Like I remember you saying the idea of like as a GM we're master plagiarizers.
Oh yeah.
Like in a good way,
In a
just
good
to be
way.
like, but it's that idea of what you're saying of like, yeah, I love that idea. Let's expand on that or change it or even just like stick that in here. I do like a comment on that too. I probably we should not just rip stuff whole cloth from people all the time, but I do think some of those things like they even have baggage isn't the right word. They have like feeling and thought and stuff that comes with them sometimes if it is familiar.
Mm-hmm.
Because I even you toss those kind of things in and then people suddenly sometimes that's like a gravitate toward it. Oh man, that's got this idea to it. So I think sometimes that can actually work in your favor even for people to realize like what it is. But yeah, I'm a pretty big Tolkien nerd. I'm not the biggest by any means, but I do love that. But I think like for me, there's a piece of like the Tolkien stories that actually I think they go back farther for me. But one of the things for him specifically, I will go ahead and talk about Tolkien is when I'm thinking about the world, I will never come to the place that he like wrote languages for his world. That's not going to be me, but
Yeah.
like that idea of like the fleshing out of a world is super like attractive to me as far as a GM. And like when I'm running a game, it's like, yeah, I want to have more history and depth and those kind of things. It's one of the reasons I'm liking more and more to actually to run games in the same world. I feel like forever I'd like, oh, make a new world, make a new world, make a new world. And then recently it's been more like, hey, I'm going to put this back in a world that we've run games or a full campaign in and let some of that be like the history of things. So that comes a lot from my interaction with just like my respect for Tolkien's like work in that. But I think like part of the thing that you'd probably see from like a Lord of the Rings type story is it kind of goes back for me to like as a kid. Um, so like in the Chronicles of Narnia, um, there are specific things that like again like so Lion the Witch and the Wardrobe, they show up and there's this like travel to meet Aslan. Like they run across different things. Like they show up and the beaver or the fawn's house is destroyed and empty. It's been taken. And they go talk to the beavers and they're given kind of the quests and like, here's the deal. But then they go, you know, and it's like there's all this stuff until they finally meet him. There's a journey that takes place.
Mhm.
And even like The Horse and His Boy, another one of Lewis's books, is that's a complete journey from start to finish. It's them moving to Narnia in the north and all these things that happen and the growth that happens through journey. And I think even like around high school time, I got into like Greek mythology, and the Odyssey was always like this story that just gripped me. You know, it's hard to read sometimes depending on your translation, but like that idea of this continual travel, and it's like the journey is it's not the end. I mean, the end's great, but it's like the journey is the thing. So I think a lot of times those kind of books, books that do that, because that's, I mean, it's particularly Fellowship of the Ring is a journey story, and then they kind of all break apart. And I guess it continues to be a journey story for some of the characters, but I love that. And that's a thing I think definitely comes out in my games. And it's why no matter how hard I try, if I want to be like, I want to keep this local, this is going to be in this city, it's going to be in this group, you know, this tiny spot. It's like, no, it never happens because the journey is so like gripping to me. So that's kind of a thing for sure. It's naming off some of those books. That's a theme that comes out of books that I really like.
Yeah, you were making me think there as you were talking. So I have noticed in your games that there is this journey aspect. And I also realize that I don't know if it's in my games, if it comes out so pointedly, but it definitely is in my thinking, and it's definitely in my reading. One of the themes that I love is the kind of growth and discovery of character. So, and I'm talking about like, you know, the kind of symbolic. I was the runt of the litter, the one with the least kind of potential, and then I ended up being the greatest magician. You know, so
Right.
you think about Magician's Apprentice by Raymond Feist, and that whole series where he starts off as like the one who had nothing, and everybody else was already an apprentice to somebody, and they couldn't figure out what to do with this guy, and then he ended up having the greater magic. So there was in that. I think in the Belgariad too, with David Eddings and that whole series. What I loved about those is they kind of contrasted these people who like went through formulas and did all this, what they called the lesser magic versus the word and the will, the person who would like, who had the power in them to like say the word with enough will that magic just happened. And it was greater magic. And so like these people who were considered like, unpowerful, then begin to grow. And that kind of growth and discovery, whether that's Ender's Game series, where this completely sci-fi, it's not about magic, but it's about this boy who was so smart and he played this game, and the game actually ended up being the Formic War on this other planet. And you have to read that. By the way, I'm listing some series here that if you guys love to read and you just don't know what to read, I'm going to like say them clearly. The Rift War Saga was The Magician's Apprentice by Raymond Feist, Feist or IE, I don't remember. Great series to start. The Belgariad by David Eddings, and then he had more series beyond that. Ender's Game the Ender Saga by Orson Scott Card, and I would follow the Shadow series. So there was Ender's Game, which was great, and then there were 3 books that were kind of set 3,000 years in the future. Not as exciting, but he then had like Ender's Shadow, Shadow of the Hegemon, and on that way. And so that's a great series. But in that, all those books, it's about a boy, because I'm a boy, but it could be about a girl too. But it's about a boy who like begins to find out as they go that he has more in him than anyone ever expected. And he ends up becoming like this great person, a person of great power. I find that I really do resonate with that kind of a story more than a journey. Like the journey books were okay, but it was never the journey to me as so much as about the person. So I guess in the Lord of the Rings, it would have been like Frodo, but it's less because it was really about the party, which was kind of that whole thing. It's like Frodo was there, but you needed Sam.
Right.
Without Sam, Frodo wasn't enough.
Yeah.
And you had to have Gandalf, and you had to, and I don't know.
Merry and Pippin almost are the growth points, like for people, if you want to like dig really deep into that, like, but they're kind of pushed off to the side too sometimes.
Yeah. So let's see. I have this whole, Terry Goodkind and his Sword of Truth series. There was like stuff in there that I really loved as far as like even, man, it's been so long since I read these. I'm going to get them all mixed up with other series of books. But the people who captured him at first that ended up, the women in red, I can't even remember their names and their weapons. Those were like inspiring to me as far as like the way some games went. Obviously there's Brandon Sanderson now. Brandon Sanderson had the Mistborn series, and like just the way that people would manifest magic by what they swallowed and how there was temporary. Like I love books that explore different kinds of magic systems. So it's not your typical magic like you would think of in D&D. And the what's the word I'm looking for? The job in all of this, that's not the right word, but the obstacle as the GM, when you read a book like this, how do you then fit that into a system where everybody else is sticking to the rules of D&D for their magic? How do you bring in somebody who it's like they swallow something, and because of that, they'll have this power for a while, and then it goes away. You have to kind of codify that in a way that works, or at least explain it in a way that makes sense. And maybe it's a mystery to the magic users you have in your game. But the Mistborn stuff was very much a different kind of magic system that I really enjoyed. 2 others in that same vein that had like really kind of cool magic systems. One was Lightbringer by Brent Weeks. Lightbringer, it's 5 in the series, and it's all about color and people who can, because of their ability to like see and use color, they can do some really crazy and amazing things. And that was a really great series, by the way, Lightbringer series. I tell everybody to read it, and nobody ever will. But everybody on this podcast, go read the Lightbringer series. It's a very fast read, and it's a really good story. And then the Magistrar series is another one I tell everybody to read. It's C.S. Friedman, I think it is.
Friedman, yeah.
And that's a girl, C.S. Friedman. And she writes this book called the Magistrar series, and it's about these people in this world. There are women who are witches, and they basically, every time they do magic, they use up some of their own life force. So the more magic they use, the quicker they die. And so they have to be very careful about what they do with their magic. But then there's these guys called magistrars. It's all men. And these men just seem to have boundless power. They don't use up their own power. And so they're kind of worshipped by everybody. Well, what you don't know, and you kind of find out through the book, is that these men basically have the ability to use other people's life source. And so they just kind of reach out and use other people's life source, maybe that they don't even know. And they can suck a person totally dry to a husk to do something great. But somebody somewhere dies when they do that. And it's this secret that nobody knows about the magistrars until this one female comes along who is able to do that. She's the magistrar who uses other people's energy, and she infiltrates this ring of men. And it's really a good set of books. It's the Magistrar series. And those kinds of things where they have different sorts of magic. So that one, where these people can like basically suck the life force out of other people, mixed with another book I read called the Deprivers, which is totally sci-fi, and it's about these people who get these abilities that when they touch someone, they can deprive them of the ability to move, or their sense of sight, or their sense of hearing, or whatever. There's like different things they can do. Those two kind of formed together in a game I ran, to have this little girl who could unmake things.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so she would look, and she could, and this also came from one of the Terry Goodkind books. I mixed three ideas together to get this girl who basically her magic was she could like unmake things go, back in time until, they are just undone. And anyway, very powerful little side character who barely was in a game, but kind of memorable in that game. These ideas of different ways that people use magic, you can take those and you can put them in the game, and you don't even have to fully explain them. You just know that this is like a crazy powerful person that's in the game, and how do your characters deal with what they don't understand?
Right.
That can be fun as well. Boy, I told Adam this is tough because I just have so many. I'm going to take just a moment and let Adam talk again.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I know like you have a lot more in that. A couple of things, and I'm going to put you on the spot again if you can answer that question. So I was thinking about the Feist books, the Rift War.
Mm-hmm.
There's another character. So you talked about the kid who, is kind of nothing's really going on with him, but then he becomes this like super powerful mage. There's a friend of his that goes through a transformation as well. And if I'm remembering these books right, where he I think he's like human, but he becomes elvish in some way. Do you remember this?
This is where
I know it's been a long time.
This is where it gets difficult because like you have the Wheel of Time stuff where you got Perrin and Rand and different things happen with each of them, and that gets confused in my mind with this group of because it's him and Thomas. Is that his name?
I don't know. He kind of becomes like a consort to I don't know what she's called. This is again great radio here, but so we need to maybe look into that. But that I was thinking about the change, and that's one that sticks in my mind. Mm-hmm. And I think when it comes to, because I have a love for the like journey of a person, not like through location, but also, through maturity and things like that too. And this is not the right book. I'm trying to look it up. There's another Magician's Apprentice. It's not Feist. So this guy, and again, I can't remember all the stuff, but like he has that transformation of even like trying to figure out like who he even is, and becoming this new kind of creature in some ways. And
and he's very important to the story too. That's kind of a cool thing, because with your characters, your player characters, my thing is it's all about like character growth and exploration, a big part. And so I want each one of these characters to feel like they're the hero of the book, that like comes from like barely able to, beat a bush in a battle to being like super powerful in some way, but it's about each of their transformation. And I want to like allow that story to happen in every game I run. And so I don't want to just focus on one character and have everybody else just feel like they're supporting characters. I want everybody to feel like they're the star. And the cool thing about these books are often you start with one person, and that's kind of whose voice you hear everything through at the beginning. And then they start switching to other characters. And I think some of them, like Robert Jordan, Wheel of Time stuff, went too far. I just didn't care about some of the characters. But it can happen with in all these stories where you really care about like what's going on with Thomas and his transformation and his importance in this story, as well as Pug, I think was his name.
Yeah, you're getting them. We're getting them now. Thomas is that one. So
Thomas is that one.
Yeah.
So those are some really cool, again, themes of development that you use. I read a book called Eye of the Beholder by, I think that was also by C.S. Friedman, and it was all about a changeling one who had no natural form. And so like, I'm not just talking about can kind of look, a little bit like somebody like Mystique, who can look like different people, could totally change shape and change form. And
Oh, wow.
her whole job was she was the one who would go to planets in the galaxies that had not been contacted by anyone and would go in and make first contact as one of them. So she would go in and take their form and begin to like
Oh,
make
wow.
that bridge between the rest of the galaxy and this planet, in order to not disturb and destroy the habitat of this planet, but also to, and it was just like super interesting. And of course there's conflict introduced and all this kind of stuff, but
Yeah.
like that character, I always loved the changeling characters. And so when I read those books, I'm like, oh my goodness, this is the character I want to play. And so, I don't know how that relates to being a GM. That's more, you can also read books and let them inspire you as a player
Oh,
character.
absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
don't
Yeah.
forget that.
Josh asked in the chat about Lightbringer. That's Brent Weeks, but Lightbringer is the series title, not the book. Black
Right.
Prism, I think, is
The
the
first book
one.
is called The Black Prism. The second one is not the subtle knife. That's the second of the, what's it called? The blinding knife. And then the third, there's the burning white, and they're really good. Brent Weeks, he did the Night Angel trilogy, which was also really good about like kind of assassin thieves and like the master assassin thief and the boy who is like becoming that. Got them on Amazon already. Good deal. That's what I like to hear. It's a good series of books. And then I've recently just started reading one called Sons of the Black Sword. Well, that's the name of the first book. That's not the series. Sons of the Black Sword. It's by Larry Correa. I never know how to say it. Correa. Anyway, he wrote this book, and it's about this guy again who is raised as one of the most fearsome kind of like law keepers in the land. They're like totally stronger than everybody, and they have this magic. They draw from what's called the heart of the mountain. Nobody knows about this, and he finds out that actually, they're there to defend law in all its aspects, and there's all these crazy like prophecies of the forgotten God, the true God, and I always love these sorts of stories anyway. But the forgotten God, and they're all fighting these demons that have basically infested the oceans, and so they can no longer get off of like their continent. And he begins to find out through this story that he actually was not of this noble birth, of this noble family. They're the only ones who can be, the ones that wield these special swords, and the swords have to accept you. If you try to just take the sword and you're not accepted, it will kill you. And so you get this intelligent sword mixed with this person, but this sword, and Groovidal like takes him, but he actually was just so there's this whole class of people that are not people. And those, it's just such a good series of books. It's like so detailed, but it goes into this whole idea of like those who are considered less than people and slaves or just property and their true worth. And it goes into the idea of, again, this guy ends up being like an orphan of one of those that was considered not people.
Okay.
And he ends up becoming like this thing. He was made into that. And through this whole thing, the sword breaks and gets lodged in him, and the magic becomes part of him, which is something that's never happened. And it's just like a good story. Sons of the Black Sword, and that whole series. I forget what it's called.
Yeah, that's cool.
Very interesting.
You could, to kind of tie some things together there, I feel like some of that could be a broader underlying element of the encounter that we ran. You have like people that are being considered as less than and being enslaved in this way and sent off across the ocean. Like what's the like backstory of what's going on there, and like who's driving that. So,
and there's so much in that series of books that you could draw from in that. I'm not going to tell you because I don't want to give everything away, but they use demon scales and demon bones to get magic. All these people.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And yeah, it's good stuff. Good stuff.
Something that you recommended it a long time ago to me, but I think has infiltrated my games a little bit is Robin Hobb's assassin books, like Assassin Apprentice and on. And there are very few books that have made or series that have made me as sad as that trilogy. That trilogy. But just for a heads up, if you ever read that, but I think like the there's like court intrigue and like a lot of stuff going like background things that are happening through those. That's kind of the way that this kid and like this as he becomes an assassin and does this stuff. And I think that has drawn reading those books specifically, and then books maybe more in that realm. There's always like a draw for me to kind of like bring into games some different. I also want to just kind of liven it up sometimes. Of it's cool to travel and go into dungeons and fight and go after the big thing and find the MacGuffin and all those things. But it's like sometimes I like to, throw you all in a ballroom to like have discussions with people and try to like political jockey a little bit, or maybe have like a mystery that's going on where it's a little more intrigue oriented. I think that those books particularly, or even just the idea of like what does an assassination look like in my fantasy world, and how could that affect the party when these kind of things are happening in that. So that those have been like really good. A thing I was going to toss out and kind of ask you, Matthew, on this too. I feel like I've seen some of this play out. Of we're talking a lot about like fantasy or sci-fi books, but what about like books that have nothing to do at all with that, kind of thing? I think there's influence there too, in ways that we can really the call I have, I guess, for you ascending GMs is like pull stuff from everywhere, get creative, like ideas from wherever, you are, kind of thing. Because I'm sometimes I'm like reading a kid's book, like to my kids, I'm reading a book to them that's like, this probably isn't have anything to do. And it's like, oh, that's kind of interesting to like, what if that twisted, what if that was kind of twisted into what we're doing over here and changed to become this, like, I'll get ideas that way. There's oh, I had it in my mind now and I've lost it. Like, are there things that you feel like you've pulled in that way, Matthew, as I'm trying to remember?
Absolutely. But as you asked me that, I didn't prepare to think about any of those. I know from even like biographies, which are as far as you get from fantasy, because they're stories of what happened in people's real life. Definitely characters that I take out of those things. I'm like, man, that's going to be a great villain or a great inspiring leader or a great, this person. And I pull those into the game.
Yeah, right.
And I read a lot of, I don't want to call them self-help. It's like neuroscience and like, those kinds of stuff. And I will bring some of that stuff in.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's that idea of whatever you read, anything that's inspiring, anything that's intriguing, be always thinking, can I use this?
Right.
Can I take the spark of this, the thing that makes me excited, and use that in a game? Because here's the whole deal of it. When you take the thing that sparks your joy in you, that shows in your game. When you're excited about something, it's a different game than when you're just running a module that somebody else wrote that you could care less about, that's really not that interesting to you, but you're just trying to follow rules. There is a total difference in those two games.
Yeah,
and the more things you can sprinkle in that like are exciting to you, are interesting to you, are challenging to think about for you, whatever it is, that's going to make your game more exciting for people, because it's just like anytime you have energy in a conversation, it's more energizing for other people.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and so that's like things like the Jumper series. There was a book called Jumper, and there was a movie called Jumper, but there was a series of books by Stephen Gould, Reflex and Eco. I forget what they all called, but that just exploring that idea of what it looks like to teleport. That's not enough to build a game around, but it is like super interesting to think about. What's that actually look like, and how does that actually happen in my game? And instead of them just saying, "Oh yeah, I just teleport over here. I just teleport to that kingdom," you begin to like imagine and think through the things that would be difficult in that, or how they could pop into the wrong place and the wrong things going on, and what that looks like. And, you can draw from that book, even if that's not like, this is my whole encounter and this is the whole story, but
Yeah.
like that idea. Or I read a book called Tally and Revenant. I can't remember the author right now, but it was about these guys who they had this thing on their palm, and they would basically, when it was time, they would go and suck the soul out of a person who it was their time to die.
Oh, okay.
And they would, and it was, interesting, like little character that I could sprinkle into my game and just, again, make it feel unique and make it feel like, what is this place that he came up with? And how did he come up with all this stuff?
Right,
Well,
right.
I read a lot. I read
Yeah.
a lot of everything, and I take a little bit of everything. And that's why I always say it's very dangerous when Adam's like, hey, I'm going to write a story about your game. I'm like, ooh, you're going to run into like 500 different kinds of plagiarism if you ever try to publish that.
It's just
Because I don't even remember where it all comes from now. I just know that I do it like breathing.
Yeah. Yeah. Any writing I do is just for us. So it's all good. Yeah, we got some chat happening here. And Wataya, I'm going to come back to yours at the end when we finish up your question, because you got some good thoughts there. But Josh says, I literally used a Disney movie that my 3-year-old was obsessed with to run an encounter. I think we've seen that with in the Dormant Mind also, with a little Frozen, right? Frozen kind of came into play for a minute, but
yes, I took a little inspiration from Frozen, and maybe it was a little too obvious. It was supposed to be a little bit obvious, so that you guys, by the end, recognized, wait a minute, this is like Elsa, and I can't even remember all their names now. But
yeah, and that was one, kind of going back. I talked about sometimes when you bring things in that are recognizable, how there's some baggage that comes into that in a good way. Baggage isn't the right word, but it's like there's some weight. And I think all of us were like, okay, we're seeing this happen. But I remember thinking, like, I don't remember who all was there, but it was like there was a character missing in my opinion, at least. And I'm like, where's this thing? Like, where is it going to happen at? Like, I'm waiting. Like, that was what I was bringing into it. It was like, we were about to get jumped on by this other creature, and it didn't happen. And I was like, but I was scared the whole time. Josh also said the difference between me running a module and running a homebrew campaign is crazy. And I think I understand that, of like, I feel like very dry a lot of times if I just try to grab, and you've talked about that, Matthew, of like taking stuff that like reforming it the way that it's like what works for you. I've sometimes been like, oh, I need to grab something, try to do that, and it just feels like bleh, and I'll just give a plug here. Like, we're going to release I don't want to call it a module because it's meant to be a little bit more massaged into what you're doing. But it is an adventure that we're going to release. And, that's something where I really want to encourage you all not to take it whole cloth either, but say, oh, I want to fit this the way, I want to make it work for my table kind of thing. But a couple I was been thinking about like books maybe outside the realm. I read a book that was on, he's like I don't know if you call him a mountain man or a scout or something. His name was Kit Carson. And that like talked about his life and all the things that he would do like out west, and his kind of adventures. The things that he was doing is he was making contact with different like indigenous people, and befriending, or sometimes like fighting against. And then it got more into like westward expansion and things like that. And that played a big role in one of the campaigns. It was called An Impending Doom, that like Matthew and Eric, who was on last week, was a part of. And Evan, who hopefully will be a part of this at some point, was in that too. And there was a lot about the way that the world was just kind of shaped that came from that, as I was doing world building, of just some like real life things that were being narrated in that way. I wondered if you talked about like neuroscience and things like that. And I know Psychonauts had some stuff to do with it too, I think, but like the game that we've talked about before, where we like went into the Emperor's mind at the end, like, is that something that you feel like came from that, or where was the kind
That
of
one was
inspiration there.
heavily influenced by Psychonauts, but also those books at the
Yeah.
time that I was reading. And it was this idea that if you were in the brain of an insane person, regular physics and regular magic and regular warfare don't necessarily happen the same way. Those rules don't apply because you're in an insane mind and it makes up the rules. And so what would that look
Yeah.
like?
Right.
And, I first got that idea when I was playing Psychonauts, the video game. If any of you remember that back on the Xbox. Is that the Xbox?
I think so.
It
Yeah.
was.
Yeah.
The idea that like you'd be walking along, then you'd jump up and suddenly, gravity would be sideways in this one area. And, and just like everything was like weird and odd and had this sense of Danny Elfman about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I thought, how could you do that in a game? And just even mentioning Danny Elfman, those sorts of movies, you can like try to give a game that feel, and it's going to be a very different game than, something else you might do.
For sure.
So.
For sure. Wataya Hotel says references and inspiration from my games are hopefully very subtle, but also super nerdy, almost like Easter eggs for those who get it. And I think that's like one of those, it's the meta, there's meta stuff happening there. It's the same way like the Frozen, situation where it's like, this is cool because I'm bringing something to it. And I think with the Easter egg idea too, it's like, it's a different kind of fun, but there's like almost like a meta discovery that's like making that interesting too. So that's good stuff.
Yeah. And it's best if you can do it in a way that is almost undetectable, but they suspect.
Right.
Because those are better than the ones where they quickly know,
Yeah.
you're doing what The Witcher does, because that's like a super popular one right now. And everybody's like, oh, that's The Witcher right there. Versus say you use Elric of Mellenborn, the Stealer of Souls, the guy who had a demon hand grafted onto his arm and he wore a glove over it. And he also had a demon eye because he had been in some huge fight and lost both his hand and his eye, and he had a patch. And so whenever he would lift that patch, he could see the spirit world. And whenever he would take off that glove, the demon would be able to fight and influence not just physical, but also like insubstantial. And but it would also, while he could fight that stuff, it would also influence him toward evil. And so there was always this battle between him and this demon arm, and it made him powerful enough to do the things he needed to do, but it also like warred within him. And it was like, and so that's like one that's from so long ago that people would probably not recognize it, even if you tried to use that kind of a character. Whereas The Witcher is so current and so like in the mind of everybody who like watches, or probably now if you did Wheel of Time stuff, since that series is out on Amazon, they'd be like, oh, that's like, Rand and the Wheel of Time, or that's like, whoever. And so it's fun like doing it in such a way that it's like they suspect this is something, but they don't know exactly what, or maybe they think, it's fun.
So we're gonna be talking inspirations for the next few. So I'm sure some of this stuff's gonna come back up. We're talking about literature, books, and things like that today. But next week will be like people that have influenced us and kind of how that's played out in our lives. That could be a lot of different things. And then this idea about like even we're in a space and having creative kind of things happening where we're like, oh, like this is cool. I want to make use of that. So that's kind of what's coming in the next episodes too, to be able to talk about this.
Yeah. And I'm going to give you one piece of advice for all of you out there. And that is find a friend who loves to read and recommend.
Yeah.
That can be. So when I went to college, I had a friend named Patrick Tolbert who I met him my freshman year. And at the end of the year, we had just really started getting to know each other. And he was like talking about books. He was constantly talking about books. And I said, man, I love the fantasy, but I've only read like the Split Infinity series, Piers Anthony, if you've read that. It's like a science fiction and fantasy together. Another great one to read, by the way. But anyway, I said, I'd love some recommendations. And then we left for the summer and I got home and I was home for like a week and a half and I got this letter in the mail and I opened it and it was just like 7 pages of just of titles, just
Wow,
like,
nice.
full pages of read this, read this, read this. And I mean, I took that and I began to like use it as my checkoff sheet. I would like read one, check it off, read one. And I went through that for years and I read so many books and I like look back and I'm like so thankful to Pat because he like opened worlds to me in these stories and books. And because of that, like I've forgotten even so many of those books, but they still reside in my brain in little bits and pieces, and that comes out in your gaming. And so find a friend who reads and recommends, and then become a reader. And I know that's hard in today's world. Maybe become an Audible book listener while you're driving and mowing, but constantly be feeding new kind. And again, don't just stick to like classic high fantasy. That's good to read all those about like the traveling party, because that's very close to what you're doing in D&D. But read all kinds of stuff, just from science fiction and fantasy, from every indie writers. Now, I read this little short story once it's called "I Am the Burning Bush," and it's about these guys who went out into space and they came back and they got infected with a parasite, and the parasite basically took all of their sensations. So they saw nothing in color. Everything sounded drab. They could taste nothing. They couldn't really feel anything. It was almost like they were numb. And because this thing wanted to feed off of their sensations, and the only time they could feel things is when they were dying, because this thing would not let them die. Oh, wow. So if they were like being killed, this thing would be repairing the cells quicker than they could be destroyed. And in that instant, they could feel things. And so they would go around and do these, what was called death parties. People would pay them a lot, but they would hang themselves, or they would drink arsenic or whatever. And as their body is like trying to fight that, the parasite's fighting that off, they can feel and see and sense stuff. But also at that time, that's the only time the parasite can jump from one person to another. And so all these people who want to be immortal, like these guys who came back from space, throw these death parties. And then they all try to get close to the guy when he's in that like moment of death. And so it's this guy who has to deal with, I want to be able to sense things, but I'm sick of these people trying to get this from me. And it's that's such a cool, like it's a short story, but it gives you like this, grist for the mill of your game. You could throw parts of that into a game. And it's all that kind of stuff that you would never think of from a fantasy perspective, as far as like these places you can. So the speculative fiction, those little best short stories of 2023, read those sorts of things, and you're going to come across a lot of duds that you're like, that was stupid. But you're going to come across gems that are like, oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
So become readers.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Agreed.
I could go on and on. As you can see, I get very excited when I start talking about books and stories and all of that. But we are going to, are there any more comments, anything we need to address before we move into our NPC for the day? I haven't looked at it.
I'm going to come back to Wataya Hotels as we get to the question later. So we'll wait on that one.
Okay. So we're going to jump into our NPC that we have. We always try to drop one of these from Gnome Stew, the book Masks. 1,000 different NPCs, and they just give you these to give you like an idea if you need somebody to be in a game. So this one's the Aberrant Lordling, Lordlarius Lashvel. That's a lot of L's. How do you say that name? You could give him whatever name you want, because I would never. Loris. We'll just say Loris Lashvel. So here's the deal with him. Okay, so his appearance is he's got this flawless complexion, golden locks, and an aquiline nose. Kind of got this classic kind of beauty about him. He's a heartbreaker. He dresses to the nines, usually silks and brocades, whatever a brocade is. Somebody here knows that, I'm sure. Carries a bejeweled sword and a barbed whip. He's cocky, he's cruel, he's hot-headed. He doesn't know the meaning of the words compassion or caution, right? And it shows. He sneers like sneers are going out of style. He's a spoiled brat who has power and wealth but lacks morals or common sense. He sees the world as a playground for himself and his friends, and he treats everybody he comes across in that way. His motivation, he lacks a moral compass, and so he's motivated just by the desire to feel pleasure, and usually that's at other people's expense. He also wants to impress his friends, right? He's always trying to put on a show, becoming much, much worse when he has an audience. So he's bad already and has like no sense of morals. But when there's people around to like play to, it gets even worse. His background: he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He's always gotten his way. Spoiled, rotten as a child. He's just as rotten in his late teens. So we're seeing this person as maybe late teens, early 20s. What he wants, he takes, and he doesn't care if he shouldn't want it or if it's not his to take. He's attracted this group of like-minded brats who venture out into the countryside. They torture beggars, they rape peasants, they generally act with reckless abandon. They just do whatever they want because they can get away with it. His equally unwholesome family shields him from the consequences of his actions. So whenever he gets into trouble, they just bribe people to look the other way because they're just crazy rich. Yeah. And so you got this guy, and what's his sentence here? Hold him down, Lawrence. I'm going to cut off another finger. Maybe he'll make that priceless face again. And so you get this idea of a guy who just is all about himself. What I like to call a fancy lad, right? From the old movie Cabin Boy, if you remember that one. But this fancy lad who dresses like a fop, and he goes out and he just basically is evil, but in a very petty way. It's not like he's got like these, big plans to rule the world, or he's going to take over this, or he's trying to make money. The whole thing is just for his pleasure. And so he's a very unlikable person, right, which is great to put in a game. And then your characters obviously feel their hackles rise whenever they are around this person. But if you keep it into a place where they don't see these crimes like firsthand, but where he is constantly just on the edge of that, they develop this real dislike for this person. And so you could drop this guy into any campaign, into a town you go into, and he could be a constant thorn in the side of everybody in your party. Yeah. And maybe they want to like teach him a lesson, but his family's really powerful. And so you can play that family into the campaign in whatever way, because undoubtedly in our campaigns, we have people in towns with wealth and position and power. And then maybe it's even somebody that they mostly are trying to gain the favor of, but they shield their son who does all this stuff. And so they become this hated family. Or maybe the guy that you want to sway is someone you really admire, but his son is this. That wouldn't make sense, because if they shield him, somebody in the family. Anyway, play with it. Play with it. NPC. What do you get from this, Adam?
Yeah. My initial thought is I have a really hard time running NPCs like this. Like there's like a line. There's a line where I man, I feel like I'm just plugging this constantly. But the adventure that we're going to release, there's a character that's the prefect of the city, and several of you who listen to this probably have been through this adventure before. But the prefect is like foppish and gaudy and doesn't care at all about the poor. Very clearly, like just whatever disdain for them. Just cares about his own. And there's a bit of like, I mean, I don't revel in that idea, but like it's fun to get the character's hackles up. This kid goes a little farther for my like, oh man, I'm ready to jump into this, kind of thing. So I struggle. I think that's something where, maybe there's a conversation in that too about like how you treat that. But I have more questions about him, I think, than like, this is how I would use him, because my question once again is like, how do you not have the PCs immediately just want to kill this kid?
That for me is
a kid, young man, but yeah,
that's the beauty, is you get them hating this person so bad, but you don't quite show them the reason that they can just kill him.
Okay.
And then but he's like constantly like berating them and throwing things in their face and acting like they don't matter and they're just beneath his guns. And so like everything in them like wants to like show this guy, and yet they can't find a good reason. Because I probably would never bring him to like a place of rape. That's just something I don't usually bring into my games. Maybe the torture, I wouldn't be showing it, but like, the idea that he has done that might come up. But I would very much make this somebody that was just constantly like jabbing at my
Yeah, right.
PCs and giving them reason to hate without giving them enough reason to like actually do anything about it.
Yeah, right, right.
So yeah, I definitely find joy in playing these kinds of characters to my people, to my PCs.
There is, I, it kind of goes back. I feel like there's always the unexpected, like you've talked about Rolo, we talked about
Mm-hmm.
that with Eric last week too. And it's like, we just like hated that character. And then it's like, yeah, he's definitely going to be a part of this, because there's like this reaction. But I know you've talked about like, you didn't plan on this random dude who was like, I don't even know what you call him. He was the, maitre d is not the right thing. It's like I walked in and he's at the desk, he's like, "What are you here for?" And
Yeah, he's like
that
the
became,
gatekeeper there
yeah,
at
the
the.
gatekeeper the for this, scene, the governor, or the other people. I don't know what your plan was for like the size and wizard, but throwing that out for Josh here again. I'm sure he'll say something in the chat about Sizen, but um, we particularly Josh's character, or just Josh hated size, so much, and he's like a target. And I don't know that was the plan, but it's like some of those things. It's almost like you can develop some of this. Sometimes it's like we have a reaction against an NPC. Now let's develop that to be even more hated. Sometimes it's like this, where it's like, this is a pretty hateful character, and the PCs are gonna like not like this person. It's kind of like you said, be a thorn for them, constant. There
And
we are,
it's
Josh.
interesting because you can. So like with Rolo was basically this kind of person who just basically like verbally cutting
Yeah,
people all the time, the PCs. But somehow, because he became part of this story, he began to have transformation. And by the
that's true.
end,
Yeah,
they liked Rolo.
right.
And so allowing that NPC growth was also an interesting part of the game
Mhm.
because they were the ones that mainly influenced that. And I got to like allow him to like begin to redeem himself. Now he wasn't this kind of bad.
Yeah,
Could
right,
could
right,
somebody
right.
like this be redeemed? Yeah, you could work that through and come to a point where they're like really pulling for this guy because they've seen that growth from this guy
Hmm.
to somebody who has some admirable nature about him.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And there is like a beauty in like redemption stories. I think that's a good point too. You talking about Rolo, the changing, that, because that's more of making that world living. Is excuse me, not everybody's like, not only we talk about, okay, they went out of this town, but the town continues, or we didn't deal with the hag, so something happened to this village that we didn't save it from, or save them from her, so things actually happen. um Even within NPCs, I don't know that we can track every single NPC they ever come across, but if it's somebody that you're continually running across, there is like, we change, we grow, we learn, and that makes the world a lot more living, to see like, oh, this person I talked to, like things actually have like occurred in their life where there is growth, or maybe deterioration, kind of depending
Yeah,
on who
good
it
or
is.
bad.
Yeah.
You didn't do something, and this kid ended up losing his father, and then he begins to hate you and other
Mhm.
PCs, and yeah, you know,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
right.
Yeah, I think this is a good, even though I struggle with it, like a really good like kind of foil that could be in a city, or in a manor somewhere in a state that they run across, and can really dig into them. Yeah.
All right. Hey, let's jump into our haversack
Yeah.
and get to some of these questions that have
Cool.
been sent in. What do we have this week?
So continuing on with Wataya Hotel 98, about the question with the sounds and everything. He says, so here is a follow-up question in return, after kind of talking about that. How do you deal with metagaming at the table? There's always going to be some degree of this occurring, but when does the table talk become too much, and how do you stop it? So metagaming. Oops, sorry.
I already clicked it on, didn't I?
Yep.
I think one of the ways that like if people are just kind of constantly talking about the meta stuff, I will sometimes just talk in character to them, like questioning. They're like, I have a +4. Would I hit somebody like this? Or like, I'm going to do, so I'll just answer them. I'll be like, excuse me, sir, you say you have a +4. What is it you refer to here, sir? Because you're in my library right now and I've asked you to get out. They're like, can I roll a perception with a +4? And that's kind of meta talk. Although that more is a kind of question that would happen in the game. But like, I'll address them, basically bringing this meta and making them see the ridiculousness of talking meta. Try to maybe pull them back into like being part of the game. I'm trying to think of what kind of meta talk would happen that I would do that to. But
yeah, I know like something you've talked about, Matthew, is and again, this may be not as much talk. I need to look back at that question again. But one of the things I know you've brought up before is when people metagame, say like, "Oh, I've read the entire monster manual and I know like everything." It's like, well, too bad, because this may look like an orc, but it's actually a beholder.
mind flayer.
Like the way the powers work, or I know we both like to template things or like change up abilities, or just that kind of stuff with our creatures.
There is nothing more exciting to me than when a player is sure they know what they've come against and they start like behaving in that way because they looked at it in the monster manual, and then I totally give it powers it wouldn't have. Because as GM, that's the whole thing. It's not about like sticking to the monster manual. It's about making a good game. And so they're like, oh yeah, I do this. And you're like, it doesn't work. And then it does this against you. And you're like, what? And then they're like, that's not part of it. And I'm like, what are you talking about? It's not part of it. Of course it is. It just happened.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. Some of that, like some of it maybe, like if there's table talk happening that maybe is kind of messing up the immersion, I think like have conversation with the group. It kind of depends on what you're looking for too, and what the group wants. Like I've been in some that are a little more like shenanigans like the whole time, and it's like that's what we're here to do.
That's part of the fun.
We know, that's part of it. Sometimes it's like this is like an epic story, so maybe we don't talk about I don't know, like what we're having for dinner tomorrow, kind of thing. Right now, let's like get into the game. Sometimes I really like to let metagame table talk happen if it's like people are trying to come up with a solution. Like I think that's one where if they kind of pull out of their characters, but they're like invested in how are we going to get past this thing, or like coming up with a plan. Somebody has those planning sessions, and I actually really like the planning sessions. Those times when it's like we just talked for an hour and a half about how to like attack this thing, and then it all goes out the window as soon as you start anyway. That's going to happen. But like I enjoy that. I think there's a part of like those types of fun that probably fits in. Maybe that's the challenge thing, is like, okay, we need to get into the stockade. So how are you going to do this? So some of the table talk metagame stuff I think is good, but just kind of feeling out like is it like bringing the game down? Is it distracting other people? I think I
think metagaming can become a problem when people are like, no, that's not the way that's written, or I know this that I shouldn't know. And that's when it comes back to the idea that, listen, I'm the GM, and this story is made to be a good story, not to necessarily follow your rules. So you just got to kind of, remind them in whatever way works for you. Always do it with a smile. You can say, oh yeah, no, I've totally made this much harder and different than you would ever expect. So I hope you live. But yeah,
for sure. Sure.
What's our next question?
Well, just kind of in that, and this is kind of going back to what Taya said in the chat. Additionally, you recently mentioned you may want to broaden your horizons from the great content they make at Gnome Stew. Admittedly, I've never read it, but I have heard really good things about the Game Master's Book of that quote Game Master's Book of unquote series. If you're looking for a logical next step, you may consider checking that out. Thanks for everything you do. Listening to your show always gets me excited to plan a great session. Sincerely. And he had posted or sent some pictures. The Game Master's Book of Random Encounters. This is by Jeff Ashworth. And the Game Master's Book of Non-Player Characters by Jeff Ashworth. He said earlier in the chat, current book I'm reading on world building does a nice job of recommending inspirational fantasy novels and what they do really well. Like, read for a great example of using religion in your games, that kind of thing. So that's really cool to hear that. Those are good. Are those things you've seen before, Matthew?
I have, actually. Yeah. And another thing that I use a lot, I'll just throw out there since we're giving resources. When I'm preparing my like campaigns, when I'm starting to come up with like what are the big ideas, I don't like to like have like one idea and that's it, and that can kind of get boring. Right. I want it to be very have the ability to be complex, and so I often start with writer's prompts for fiction and for poetry and for I think there's like I was just looking at it today in my my Kindle library. I have one called like 101 science fiction and fantasy prompts. Okay. And it's meant for people who are in creative writing classes, and it's meant to get them, they just give like the very basics. It's kind of like what we're doing here with this encounter starters, right, but even less. It's a little more than what we did with the dragon rider who appeared over the city, but not much more, and a little less than what they're doing here in these encounter. But they throw out something, and then you are supposed to write a story about it. Well, for me, that is like, oh, this is something we could create together. Those sorts of things are really good as well.
Yeah, that's cool.
There's tons of those out there.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's awesome.
Yeah.
So we have one more question here. It's in the haversack. And this was from Evan. When it comes to leveling up, do you prefer to award experience points or to award full levels after certain milestones? For me, I have done both, but I most tend to milestones, or even what I would call like narrative appropriate time. That's a really bad way of putting it. When it's narratively appropriate, like that kind of thing. So that's what I'm tending to lean towards these days, is maybe seeing like an arc finished. So it's like, okay, that's like, you have a little bit of rest, you get experience, or something like story-wise happened, we're going to level up at that point. I do also, like I tend to level the party. I don't typically have like different levels of like experience going to people. I have done that a few times with maybe if like a party member has been gone, like a player is not able to show up for like 3 times in a row or something like that, which isn't often, but there's been times where maybe I haven't leveled them up as quickly, probably because I leveled the party when they weren't there. So that happens. And then maybe the next time they jump up, after that. So that's kind of the way I do that.
Yeah. When I first started playing D&D 3.5, I think it was, I would read these stat blocks of these monsters, and it would say, give this much experience points. And, when this kind of trap gives this many experience points, I tried to really keep track of those things. And I would tell people at the end of the night, you have 3,722 experience points now. Okay. At the end of this session, you can each, for this trap and this monster and this, add, 246 experience points. And then they had spots along the way where it was like level up. That was never as satisfying to me as the story. For me, and here's the thing. There may be people out there that are very into that sort of leveling up, and they do it really, really well. And it makes it super exciting for people to realize, hey, I beat, this, and it's worth this much. And just for me though, it's always story first, calculations later. And so, like Adam was saying, mine mostly follow Whenever I feel like you did enough to level up as the GM, you are bestowed a level. This feels like you have just moved from a level 6 type person to a level 7 type person. And now
Yeah.
you are, and everybody's like, yay. And sometimes we go a couple sessions and that happens. And then sometimes we go like what feels like 6 sessions or more because they're going through some really big thing.
Yeah,
And
right.
when they get out, I've even done a thing where it's like, you guys like level twice. You guys did so much, and then all of a sudden it's like you just bump, and then people are like, "Oh my
Yeah.
goodness!" Now the hard part about that is, I feel like leveling up slowly gives you the chance to really experience all of the stuff that level has to offer. But occasionally there's just not much that happens at a level, and so it's
Right.
nice to hit that little double bump. But it's the difference between starting a character at level 1 and truly knowing who this character is because you've played every level, and starting a character at level 9, level 7 or level 9. It's like, oh, I get all this stuff real fast. And you don't really understand the character the same way.
Right.
I don't want it to go too fast because then I don't think you truly have plumbed the depths of who is this character and how do they live. But I also don't want to beleaguer and make you stay at level 3 that's just on the verge of something exciting about to be yours for too long. And then people are like, I'm sick of just doing the same thing every time. You want to kind of hit that balance. But for me, that all happens in story, and it happens kind of as I feel it should happen. Maybe I've got too much of a God complex, but I rule the monsters. Nothing's what you expect. I decide when you level up. I am the supreme being, the game master. But in a way, it's true.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel all that. I feel all that for sure. I do
I
wonder
feel all of that.
all that. It's just ditto to that. I do like push back against my own way of doing things. Like I wonder, and there maybe this will be a poll on Instagram probably, but with that as a player, like it doesn't matter to me, and it's probably the way I do it that way. But I wonder if it's nice for players to be like, man, I'm only like 100 XP away from leveling up. Like if there's an anticipation there that like our way of doing it maybe takes away. I'm just like, playing devil's advocate here of maybe, if you're like coming into a session, like I only need 100 XP more to get to level 7. That
What I feel like happens there, though, if people do it that way and know it that way, and maybe this is just my misunderstanding of how it goes, but I feel like people do that. It's like in a video game when you go out and you're like, all right, I'm going to grind and get gold, or I'm going to grind and get experience.
Right,
so you go to like basically, I'm just killing every little goblin there is just to get this experience. But it's like there's no fun in it. It's like a chore just to get to this. I want everything to be like the exaltation of my character overcoming things, not like I'm grinding out at a meat market here, just chopping these things that come out of the generator.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think like background stuff. I'm sure I talked about it before, but that WoW game that Eric was talking about, Danny, would run. We played for like I don't even know how long, 3.5 years. I think I was Josephus Whiteleaf, and I got to level 7. I'm talking 3.5 years real time.
And he might have had 10 gold.
There were a lot of games, sessions that were like 10 hours long. I mean, that's maybe not 10, but like 8 hours long is not too crazy. We had a lot of time playing, and level 7. And yeah, it was like 80 gold. No joke. Over 3.5 years of playtime. But gold wasn't as important, I guess. But I don't know where I'm going.
It's a conversation for another time, but I love this idea of low magic item, low ability games versus like high crazy, you get so much and can do so much games. And there can be fun in both. Sure. But you have to kind of be consistent in whatever style you start and end with, and what people's expectations are.
Know what your party is and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's good stuff. Cool. Yeah. Well, thank you all for asking questions. Always, the haversack's always open. Ready to get more of those, and we love doing it.
Yeah. So, Adam, before we go today, tell people how they can get this or when we're going to have this. Okay, so I'm going to throw out a little disclaimer here. We got the domain name riseofthegm.com. I just got it 2 days ago. We should have had this a long time ago. I got it. And for some reason, every time I try to go to that page, I've published just like the most basic page, and it still has not populated out to the internet that domain is ours. And so it still says 404 page not found.
Right.
We wanted to post it there, but Adam has created a module that we've gone through several times, and we would love to make it available to you guys just to say, hey, thanks for coming to the podcast. Yeah. This is episode 10. We want to give something back, and we're going to do this occasionally through the life of this podcast. But Adam, tell them a little more about how that's going to be available.
Yeah. So what we're going to do is give the website a couple days to maybe pop up. So be looking Saturday, most likely. And if it doesn't, we're going to link that through like our Instagram and our Twitter. One way or the other, that'll be linked there on Saturday, but it may be even like a Google Drive file, for now.
We're going to get that to you all, and it's going to be free, and it's just a thank you. And don't expect that it's like some so crazy in-depth module that you would get from somewhere. It's something to give you guys a start, an option, right?
It's a fun one shot. I've run this adventure 4 times now with 4 different groups, and it's always been a blast, and people always,
and it's always been different.
Yeah. That's the beauty of that is, which was one of the reasons why I was like, I really want to, make this available for people who are like, I just need an adventure to run for a couple sessions, maybe. So, so you'll be taking a look at that. We're at Rise of the GM podcast on Instagram. We're at Rise of the GM on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it. You can send to the haversack, riseofthegm@gmail.com, and ask questions like we answered today. And
and very soon you can go to our website, riseofthegm.com. Yep. I think you see the common theme here. Yeah. Rise of the GM. All right. Well, hey, thanks for joining us today. We're going to get ready to get off of here and let you get about your day, but we always enjoy talking games. Join us next week, and we're going to talk about more ways of inspiration, people maybe that inspired us on Rise of the GM.
Thanks all.